Hey guys, this is Ash with Badash Outdoors, and the rivers are all blown out. It's really stormy outside, so I'm taking this opportunity to get ready for some steelhead fishing. It's really important to take time to prep yourself when you have the opportunity, because when you're on the river, you want to be ready to go and not caught tying things up. So for example, if you're out on the river for 8 hours and you have to tie up twice as much as your buddy and he gets in 10 casts while you're tying up, over the course of 8 hours, that could be like 80 casts. And when we're talking about the fish of 1,000 casts, every cast counts. So today I'm going to be showing you how to tie up steelhead worms. I love fishing steelhead worms because they're a very effective technique for catching steelhead for a couple different reasons. One, it's unlike bait in that you don't have to continuously retie hooks or retie bait onto your hooks. And it offers a lot of different things that is attractive to a steelhead. For example, different colors, different movement, and a great profile that you can use for steelhead too. So I'm going to show you how to tie these up, and I'm going to start with our hooks. So I'm using a 2/0 Gamakatsu hook. This is a great size for the steelhead that I'm fishing for. I am using 15-pound Maxima Ultra Green. 12-pound or 15-pound is really good for me. Depending on the area that you're fishing, you may want to size down to a 10 or 12-pound line, but that is totally up to you and the water conditions. Another thing that I have is a threader, because I'm going to thread each worm individually, and I have WFO worms, which is a poured molded plastic worm. So I don't know what the river is going to be like the next time I fish, so I decided to go for some variety in terms of what I'm setting up. So I picked a worm that's really great in all conditions. This is a nightmare worm. The size, this is a 4.5-inch worm, and I like this because it's colorful. It has some black on it, and the great thing about anything black is that it offers a silhouette even in dirty water. So in low or clear water, this is going to be a great option. In normal conditions, it's going to be a good option, and in dirty conditions, it's going to be a great option. I have a bright pink worm, and I have a very dark worm. This is called a Midnight Bright, but it's an all black worm. Again, the profile of a black worm is something that is going to be easy for fish to see in dirty water, and it has a nice chartreuse tail. Nice and bright. So the first thing that I'm going to do is tie a hook onto my line, and I use about an arm length of line for me, which is close to 2 feet. So I tie that onto my hook, and then I'm going to add a corky to it too. So there's a couple different ways that you can rig a worm. You can rig it regular or wacky, and I'm going to go over what both of those are like. So first off, I'm going to pick out a corky for the worm that I'm going to use. And in this case, I'm going to use a little corky that is kind of red and black, because I'm going to use a nightmare worm that's also red and black. The reason why I use a corky, a couple different things. One, I want my worm to fish as long as possible. The only time I really want to switch out or throw away this worm is when a steelhead has ripped it up, ideally. So the corky keeps the worm from crashing down onto the hook and ripping up. It kind of creates a buffer there. And corkies are buoyant, so it's going to kind of float your hook up a little bit while your worm is drifting through the current. Now the worm is water neutral, so it's going to this one's going to float a little bit, but for the most part, when it's underwater, it's going to kind of stay where it's at. So now that I have my hook, my line, I have a corky on it, I'm going to go ahead and pop a worm on. So this worm, I'm going to rig regular first. There's a hole at the end of my threader. I'm going to put some line through. And these worms that I have, they come with kind of like a film on them, and I usually take that and run it along the threader just to make it slide through the worm more easily. Another thing that you can do is just wet it itself. So where I start with this, I'm going to rig it regular. So right at the base of the thickest part of the worm, where it starts to taper off and get a little bit thinner, I find a spot. My worms are great in that it kind of has this ribbed area that starts towards the end of the tail, and so I just push my threader in right about there, and I run it all the way up the worm, and I'm going to come out the head of the worm. The important part of this is that you try to keep your threader right in the middle of the worm. So you're kind of working up slow, go bit by bit, check, make sure you're still in the center, and then continue to work your way up. You don't want to poke through the top or the bottom of the worm. The goal is to stay right in the middle. So coming right out end of the worm here. And now I'm gonna take it and I kind of hold the entire worm and slide it down. I'm just trying to avoid any sort of ripping or additional tear on the worm that I don't need. I want it to be in the best shape possible for when I fish it. So I pulled it through, I have my line all the way through the worm. Again, I hold the entire worm instead of just pulling the tail down or scrunching it down. I hold the whole worm and run my line through it. So now I have my worm threaded on and I have my corky here. The way that you kind of want to space it is that the tail of the worm kind of comes right to the tip of the hook, just like that. So the problem with having a worm that's too long, like much longer than the hook, is that if you have a steelhead nip at it, you could just get a piece of the worm and not the hook. This way, when the fish comes after my worm, I want it to grab all of this and get a good hook into it. So this is kind of the regular style to rig a worm. Now I put these on these boards. They're called fishing boards. I like using these again for efficiency because when I'm out in the river and I break off, all I need to do is grab one of my worms, pop it off of this leader, unwrap it, tie it, and I'm fishing again. So it's a great way to stay organized, to see how many things you have tied up. It just makes the whole process a lot easier so when you're out in the river, you can just enjoy. Cool. So I have my first worm rigged the regular way. Now I'm going to rig another one, the same type of setup, but I'm going to rig it wacky. So the reason why I offer a regular and a wacky style worm, a couple different reasons. When the regular worm is going through the current, like it's going to, the tail of it's going to kind of flap over the hook, the corky is going to float the hook up, that's great. When a wacky worm rig, when a wacky worm rig, when I rig up a wacky worm, this is going to float up. The corky is going to float the hook up. So as it goes through, my tail is going to be really wiggly. And if the fish goes for the head of the worm, it's going to go hook in first. It really doesn't matter whether you use regular or wacky. It's just sometimes a different movement is what excites the fish. So some days one works a little bit better than the others, and you never know what that's going to be. So you have both options ready to go. So wacky worm is rigged. You start out exactly the same way. You have about 2 feet of line. I'm tying onto a 2/0 hook.
And why 2/0?
I like the 2/0 size because it's appropriate for the size of steelhead that I'm fishing on the Olympic Peninsula. They're a strong hook, they're appropriate size in terms of the worm that I'm using is a larger 4.5 worm, so it's just a really good, it's a really good like pair with that size of a worm and this size of a fish.
Would people fishing other places want to use smaller hooks, or when would you use a smaller hook?
Sometimes I would use a smaller hook if I'm in lower, clearer water conditions where I'm using a much smaller, less intrusive worm. But for the most part, a 2/0 hook would be a great size, pretty much all around. Okay, so I have this rigged up. I add my corky. Grabbing my worm. So now, instead of rigging the worm from the tail, I'm gonna start with the head of the worm. So flipping the worm around, I'm gonna go right straight into the middle of the head. And I'm gonna flip it over and just try to pay close attention, keeping the threader right in the middle of the worm. And if I start to get too close to one side or the other, sometimes I'll back out just a little bit and then continue to push the threader through the worm. So now that I see the tail is starting to taper into that smaller portion of the worm, I'm going to go ahead and pop the threader out. Hold the entire worm, slide it down my threader, up over the line, continuing to hold on to my worm, and I'm going to pull the line through all the way down to the quirky. And now I have another nightmare worm rigged up, but this time wacky. So again, I'm gonna set this on my board. Now I have two of the same setup rigged differently. So if my color works, I have multiples of that color. If one style works, I can rig up more regular or more wacky worms, and those are gonna be ready to go for me. So that's how you rig up regular and wacky steelhead worms. From this point, I'm gonna rig up a whole bunch of different colors so that I have things to fish in dirty water, clear water, average conditions, and I'm going to be the most prepared for when I actually do get to go out steelheading. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this is helpful to you, and once you go fishing and catch a fish, send us fish photos.